Hey guys, it's Sarah. Today I have a really fun video that actually came as a request from a subscriber. This was her idea and I loved the idea, so I had to do it. She actually requested this like 3 weeks ago and I'm finally getting around to doing it. But her name is Estella Perez and she suggested that I make a video showing what my favorite palette would look like with all the shades that I either use the most or hit pan on from all the palettes in my collection. So basically I'm gonna be curating my perfect palette based on either my most used shades in my collection or the eyeshadow shades that I've hit pan on. So I think this will be really fun. I went ahead and listed out all of the shadows. I think that this is going to turn out to be a really pretty palette. It's going to be very me. You can probably guess that it's going to be a lot of mauves and like dusty rose type colors, and you would be right. There are a lot of those. But there are also a few fun pops of color too. I kind of have two sides. I really like my neutrals. My sort of cool rosy neutrals are really where it's at for me. I love like soft shimmery pinks and golds. But then I also love playing with like blue eyeshadow and some other like pastel colors too, so it's gonna be interesting. I definitely don't have a shade that I've hit pan on in every palette, so for the palettes where I haven't hit pan, I'm gonna either choose the shade that I've obviously used the most, or if there's not a shade that I've obviously used the most, I will just be picking my favorite shade. That's how I've just kind of decided to do this. But the first palette, I definitely do have pan in this palette. It's the Balm Nude Dude. This is like my oldest palette in my collection, I think. And I do have pan in 3 shades, but I decided to only pick 2 of those 3 for my perfect palette, just because one of them is a gold and I have like 3 golds in my collection that I've hit pan on. So I decided to pick a different gold that I like a little bit better than this one. So the first shade I've hit pan on in here is Fearless, which is a matte cream color, and I pretty much always use a shade like this in any look that I do. So it would only make sense to have a shade like that in my perfect palette. And then the other shade in here that I've hit pan on that I had to include in my perfect palette is the shade Flirty. This is a beautiful like medium purple with a gold shift to it. I feel like this shade is probably the main reason why I bought this palette, and I would absolutely want to include that shade in my perfect palette because it's just so unique and pretty, and it goes right along with the shades that I always love, which is like dusty, rosy, mauve colors. So those are the 2 from this palette that I will be including in my perfect palette. The only other one in here that I've hit pan on is Faithful, and this one actually has the largest pan of all 3. And it's a really pretty gold, but I just have another gold that I like even better that I decided to include. I didn't feel like I needed to have every single gold that I've hit pan on. Apparently I use light shimmery golds and like champagnes a lot, I've learned. Moving on to another palette that has a very special place in my heart is the Anastasia Soft Glam palette. I've only hit pan on 1 shade in here, so that's the only one that I'm going to be including. It's definitely my most used shade, and it's the shade Glistening. This is my favorite light shimmery gold in my collection, so of the 3 golds that I have hit pan on, this is the one that I chose to include because it has this beautiful rosy, almost lavendery undertone to it that's just very unique and very different from anything else that I have. And it's just soft but still very reflective. I actually do have this on my lid today. I tried to wear as many of these shades on my eyes today as I could, but I put so many of them on that you can hardly even tell which ones are on there anymore. But that is the one that's on like the inner part of my lid. So that one had to be included. Next is my Modern Renaissance palette, and I've also hit pan on 2 shades in here, and it's both of the shimmers, Vermeer and Primavera. I'm only going to be including Vermeer in my perfect palette because Primavera is another light champagne-y gold, and again, I just wanted to include the Soft Glam one instead. I love wearing soft pearly pinks on my lid. That's probably one of my favorite go-to looks, is just any kind of soft, either a soft pink or a soft gold, which is why those are the 2 shades in here that have pan in them, because those are probably 2 of my most commonly used shades, and I tend to hit pan on shimmers more quickly than I do mattes. But yeah, had to include Vermeer. It's a beautiful light pearly pink and I really like it. So next I have a quad that I've hit pan on every single shade in. This is the Wet n Wild Walking on Eggshells Quad. This was a favorite of mine for so many years, and sadly Wet n Wild is no longer cruelty free, but I do still have this. I still use it. It is my goal to eventually use up this quad. I actually had it in my project pan last year, so that is why I've hit pan on all 4 shades. But I decided not to include all 4 shades in my perfect palette because 2 of them I could kind of take them or leave them. You know, I use them whenever I use this quad, but the 2 that I use the most and that I have the biggest pan on are the eyelid shade and the transition shade. The eyelid shade is just a slightly deeper, more like blushy pink, light pink shade than Vermeer from Modern Renaissance, and I wanted to include both because, like I said, I love wearing a soft shimmery pink on my eye, and I absolutely do not mind having two of those in my perfect palette because it's probably the shade that I would be the quickest to use up, so it would be nice to have two, one that's a little bit softer and lighter and one that's a little bit deeper. So yeah, that might sound like overkill, but it's just the way I am, okay? But yeah, that one, and then the transition shade is really the perfect transition shade for my skin tone. It's just this very light matte tan color. I really do like this quad. I'm sad that Wet n Wild is no longer cruelty free, but definitely had to include those two in my perfect palette because they're two of my like go-to eyeshadows. Like if I'm just doing a really quick look, I'll just throw that transition shade in my crease and the pink shade on my lid, and that's it. Like that is my signature go-to eyeshadow look. Okay, next I have a couple of single shadows, not magnetic singles, but like individual singles that I've hit pan on and that I wanted to include because I love both so much. I guess it wouldn't really make sense to have these in my perfect palette because they're cream shadows and all the other shadows I'm talking about are powder shadows, but this is like a hypothetical world that we're living in right now, so I am going to count them. But one of them is Bill from ColorPop. This is one of their Super Shock shadows. This is a very me color. Like if you know me, you know this is a very me color. It is just a dusty mauve, and I love wearing this all over my lid. I never thought to own like a matte cream Super Shock shadow, but I really like it. Usually I'm drawn to their shimmers, but this cream formula is really nice for just a matte wash of color. Really, really pretty. And I have just barely hit pan on this, so I felt like it made sense to include it. And then also another one, this is one that I'm actually close to finishing up. It's the e.l.f. Long Lasting Lustrous Eyeshadow in the shade Soiree. I have been blabbing on and on about this for years. I love this eyeshadow. It's a beautiful formula, beautiful color. It's like a metallic mauve. I love it as just an all over lid shade. It's really pretty as a one shadow look or just as a pop on the lid. Beautiful. You guys knew this was going to be included, didn't you? Moving on to another Anastasia palette. I had all these palettes laying out on my floor while I was looking through them, and now they're covered in cat hair. I just vacuumed in here like a couple days ago, but apparently I need to do it again. So I haven't hit pan on any shades in here. This palette has really grown on me. I love this palette. But the shade that I definitely have the biggest dip in, so I'm going to assume this is my most used shade, is Dazzling. I feel like I'm very close to hitting pan on that one, but it's this really metallic, kind of taupey rose gold color. Really pretty. Not mad that that one is included because it's a beautiful color. I don't know if it's my favorite color in this palette, but it's definitely one of my favorite colors. The only thing is those shimmers are extremely flaky. That's the only thing that bothers me. Like I literally just took that on my finger and like patted it onto the outer part of my lid today, and I had fallout all over my cheeks. Now luckily I was able to just kind of dust it away with like a tapered brush, but still really annoys me. But I still love the color, so I'm willing to look past it. Moving on to Subculture from Anastasia. This is my last Anastasia palette. The shade in here that I definitely use the most is kind of a boring shade, but it's a very useful shade, and it's the shade Dawn, which is this warmer transition shade. So I have a very neutral transition shade in this Wet n Wild quad that's included, and then a warmer one, and then I also have a couple of very cool transition matte shades as well. So we'll have a nice selection of transition shades and like light crease shades in my perfect palette. But yeah, I think I'm very close to hitting pan on that shadow. Next are my e.l.f. 18 pan palettes. First one being the New Classics. I haven't hit pan on any of the shades in my e.l.f. palettes yet, so I kind of just had to go off of what I feel like is my most used. A lot of these have like, they look like they have an equal amount of use on them, but I decided to pick Charmer from here because A, this shade is like one of the main reasons I bought this palette. I know that sounds silly. I mean, I love all these shades pretty much, but that one in particular, I just love like a blushy mauve matte crease color, and it's a little bit deeper than some of the other crease colors that I've included here. So you'll notice in this group of shadows there are not a lot of very dark shades, and that's because I don't really wear dark eyeshadow very often. When I'm trying to like add dimension to a look and deepen it up, a lot of times I'm still reaching for what most people would consider a medium tone as opposed to like a really dark color. So there's a couple of dark shades in here, but most of the shadows, the deepest they get is kind of like that level of depth, which is fine with me. Yeah, Charmer doesn't necessarily look like it's been used as much as some of these shimmers, but that's just because I don't use as much of matte shadows when I use them, but I definitely think that that is one of the shades that I use the most in this palette. Now, the e.l.f. Opposites Attract palette. It was really hard for me to pinpoint which of these shades I use the most. Honestly, it would probably be Fresh, but Fresh is so similar to some of the other light transition colors that I've already picked that I decided to go for something a little bit different that I feel like I also use a lot when I use this palette, and it's the shade Calm here, which is a cool, almost bluish gray, and that color is one of the best features of this palette in my opinion because I don't have a color like that anywhere else in my collection. It is very rare to find a true, cool, like slate gray like that, and I do tend to reach for that color when I'm using this palette because it's just something different, and when I'm using this palette I'm drawn to that color because it's not a color that I get to use that often, I guess is what I'm trying to say. That's the color I chose there. I felt like I definitely wanted to have a balance of warm and cool tones in this perfect palette of mine, but I do think it leans a little more cool, and I wanted to have a really true cool gray. Now for my favorite palette, I had such a hard time picking which one for this palette. I can't even figure out which of the shades in here that I've used the most. A lot of them have like the same amount of wear on them. It's very hard for me also to pick a favorite shade in here. I decided to go for what is not only one of my favorites, but also one of the most unique shades that this palette has, and it's the shade Underwater. It's like this teal, emerald, deep, shimmery shade, and it's so different from anything else in my collection that it just makes me happy, and I just want it to be included. There are a few blues in this perfect palette. Blue, I think I've decided, is my favorite type of color to wear on my eyes. It's not to say I don't like playing with other colors too. I actually really like the greens in here also. I also love yellow eyeshadow and peach. Like, those are some of my favorite colors to play with, but blue is just, well, blue is my favorite color, period, like not just for makeup, but I don't know, I love that color. It is so rich and beautiful. You'll see in the swatch, it actually looks true to color on your skin. It doesn't just look that pretty in the pan, it actually looks that pretty when you use it. So, very special color in my opinion. Moving on to another palette that's pretty new to me. This is the Shared Planet Polar Bear palette. Once again, don't have any pan in here yet. But my most used shade in here is definitely the shade Cub, and this is a little bit more of a cooler, kind of rosy transition color. Very pretty, very unique, even though it doesn't look that different from anything else. I really like that color. I do have that in my crease today, but like I said, I'm wearing so many shadows on my eyes right now that you might not even be able to pinpoint it. But when I do reach for this palette, that's usually the color that I use to start out a look. I like how it's just a little bit rosy. You guys know me. I have to live up to my middle name, okay? The rosy shadows are where it's at for me, and there's just something nice and rosy about that, even though it looks like just a plain Jane matte transition color. Next, I have the Milani Bold Obsessions palette, and this is gonna be, sorry to say, another transition color. There are a lot of options in my perfect palette for crease colors, and I use the word crease color and transition color kind of interchangeably because a lot of days I use what I'm referring to as a transition color as my crease color when I'm not going very deep. A lot of times I will just reach for a very like sort of light tan color for my crease. The shade in here that I've used the most would have to be the shade Bear in Mind, which is another kind of like what I would consider a starter shade for a look. This is usually the shade that I dip into first when I'm using this palette, just to get my look started. It's another light tan, but it has a satiny finish, and it definitely is different from any of the other tan crease colors that I have so far in this palette. So yeah, there are quite a few sort of similar shades, but I still think they're all different enough that I wouldn't mind having them all in my perfect palette. Yeah, that's the shade in there that definitely has the biggest dip though. Not because it's anything really that special or unique, but it's useful. Okay, so then I have my palette of magnetic singles. And most of these are from ColorPop, but a couple of them are from MakeupGeek, and I decided to pick one from ColorPop and one from MakeupGeek. Is it okay if I pick two actually from ColorPop? Would you guys be okay with that? Because the three that I really want to pick are these three right here. ColorPop Wait For It, ColorPop Tiki, and MakeupGeek Voltage. This is like my favorite single shadow combination, and I would love to have all three of those in my perfect palette. So you know what, I'm gonna cheat here and actually pick two from ColorPop because I can't help myself. But yellow actually is one of my favorite colors to wear on my eyes. It's kind of unexpected, like it's not something that you would think would look pretty on most skin tones, but I actually feel like it can look, I mean, it's not that different from gold, you know, like gold is usually pretty yellow in undertone, so I feel like if you like gold eyeshadow, you'll probably like a pastel yellow like this, or even Paper Tiger from ColorPop, but I'm getting sidetracked here just talking about yellow. So anyway, yeah, I'm gonna have to pick both of those just because I can't pick between Tiki and Wait For It, and if I'm being honest, it does look like Tiki has a little bit more wear on it, like it does look like I've used it a little bit more than Wait For It, but I just really want to include both because they both make me so happy. So yeah, Tiki is that sort of satiny matte yellow, and Wait For It is that matte peach color. And then the one from MakeupGeek that I chose is Voltage. I talk about this one a lot. It is a duochrome whitish yellowish gold, and it's just very brightening, really pretty. I actually did a halo eye with Wait For It and Voltage recently, and they just looked so pretty together. There's just something very different and unique about Voltage that it's kind of, you look at it and it doesn't look super bold, but at the same time it makes a statement, and that's why I really like that. So anyway, just going on and on about those, but yeah, I have to pick three. Can't help it. Okay, then I have the Profusion Spectrum palette, and I feel like I've hardly used this palette, so it's really hard for me to pick the shade that I've used the most. I think really the shade I've used the most is Peacock, but that's only because it was in my eyeshadow roulette and not because I necessarily, well, I mean, I chose to use it, but I was using it because it was in my roulette. So I wouldn't say that's my favorite. I actually just decided to pick my favorite shade out of here, which is the shade Bermuda, which is this really pretty kind of bright baby blue. There's nothing else quite like it in my selection of shades so far, so that's why I went for that one, just because it's the one that I like the most out of all these, and I didn't really have a most used shade in there. All right, we're getting down to the very last couple of shadows here. So the next palette is my Billie Beauty Eyes of India palette, and again, I don't have any pan in here yet. But if I look at all these shadows, the one that actually seems to have the most use, and honestly, that also is my favorite, is the shade Mayo here. It's this really pretty royal blue. I definitely wanted to have a royal blue in this palette because I love that color. I think that would have to be one of my favorite colors, not just of eyeshadow, but just one of my favorite colors, period. And I just really wanted to have a shade like that in my perfect palette. And then my last little quad, this is the e.l.f. Pumpkin Pie Bite Size Eyeshadow Quad. And this I haven't had for very long. I can't really necessarily pinpoint my most used shade in here, but I think it's probably this shade right here, the third shade over, which is just this matte kind of neutral brown. And even though it doesn't look very exciting, I did want to include that in my perfect palette because I felt like I needed at least one sort of deeper color to just anchor all these shades together and to give me something to use as a liner or just to deepen up the outer corner if I ever want to. Also because I do have a few blues in here, and I do think that brown goes well with blue. So that was such a fun video. I had a lot of fun just going through all my eyeshadows and selecting these shades, and I have to say I love my my palette that I came out with. I think that, I mean, I would totally buy it if I didn't already have them in my collection. But yeah, this is really interesting. I think that the palette overall came out to be a little, maybe not necessarily the most cohesive, just because I have a couple of different color families that I really like to play with, but I think it just came out to be very me, and it probably, I don't know, let me know if you were surprised by the way that it turned out. But yeah, thank you Estella for this awesome idea. It was so much fun. I would love to see other YouTubers do a similar video. If anybody else wanted to do it, I would be so excited to watch because I think this is just such a fun concept, and I love any kind of eyeshadow related content. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. I upload every Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, lately also on Sundays most of the time, so love to see you again soon, and yeah, hopefully I'll talk to you soon in my next video.